Right after my C-section, I texted, "Please, I can't lift him. Just need a little help." Mom responded, "We're too busy. Try your neighbor." I stared at the message until my eyes burned. 3 weeks later, still barely walking, I woke to 53 missed calls and a message from my sister. "We're in trouble. Send $1,500 now." I just replied with, "I wasn't expecting much, but I thought they'd at least show up once." 3 days after my C-section, I couldn't even sit up without wincing. The pain was like a pressure cooker going off inside me. My son had been crying for almost an hour, lying in his bassinet a few feet away, and I just couldn't get to him. I'd been trying to reach him with a blanket, trying to pull the bassinet closer, but I ended up crying right along with him. I hadn't slept in 2 nights, so I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and sent the text I thought would make things right. "Please, I can't lift him. Just need a little help." I stared at the screen, waiting. I thought maybe my mom would finally show some maternal instinct. Maybe my sister would surprise me. I was wrong. 3 minutes later, "We're too busy. Try your neighbor." I read it twice, 3 times. I remember thinking it felt like a joke, like some messed up prank they'd laugh about later. But it wasn't. That was it. No follow-up, no call, just that message like I was some annoying stranger asking for a favor. I didn't reply. Instead, I messaged Ryan, the neighbor I barely knew. He and his wife were separated, and I'd mostly seen him in passing. We'd never had a real conversation, but something about him always seemed steady. I didn't know what else to do. I was desperate. He came over 10 minutes later, didn't even knock hard, just let himself in gently. He didn't say much, just walked over, lifted my son, and helped me sit up. He warmed a bottle, held the baby so I could rest, then cleaned up the kitchen without being asked. I think I mumbled, "Thank you," a dozen times. And when he finally left, I sat there in silence, holding my son and staring at the front door like something massive had just happened. No one from my family followed up. No call to ask how I was recovering. No offer to bring groceries. I had a cousin in Florida who sent me an Uber Eats gift card. That was it. A cousin who lived across the country showed more care than the people 10 miles away. Then, 3 weeks later, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. 53 missed calls, most from my sister, a few from my mom, one from my dad, which was rare, and one unknown number I didn't recognize. Then came the text, "We're in trouble. Send $1,500 now." Just like that. No hype, no explanation, no punctuation, no mention of the fact that I was still healing, that my son was barely a month old, that I'd been completely abandoned. I just stared at it. I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not sadness, just this quiet clarity. So I replied with the same words my mother sent me, "Try your neighbor." Then I turned my phone off. Not just that day. For the next 3 days, I left it off, and I started making a list in my head of who I could count on and who I couldn't. The people I loved the most were nowhere near that list. When I turned my phone back on, I expected chaos. I got silence. Not a single missed call, no voicemails, nothing. Like my reply had stunned them into retreat. Or maybe they just assumed I was bluffing, that I'd cave and send the money eventually. They always assumed I'd cave. Growing up, I was the one who kept things glued. When my sister stormed out of a family dinner, I followed her. When Mom went silent for days over some petty argument with Dad, I was the buffer. When anyone needed a favor, a ride money for something last minute, they called me, and I showed up every time. I didn't realize how uneven the scale was until I became a mother, and nobody showed up for me. Ryan started stopping by more, not in a pushy way, just little things. He brought over homemade soup one night and said it was from his grandma's recipe. He'd peek his head in and say he was just checking if I needed anything heavy lifted. He never stayed long unless I asked him to. His presence was quiet, easy, safe. His wife had moved out 6 months earlier. He told me one evening while he helped assemble a bookshelf. They were still technically married, but it was done. I asked if they had kids. He shook his head, said that was the one thing she never wanted. He paused, then looked over at me, holding my son, and said softly, "He's lucky to have you." I remember that exact sentence. It stuck. A few days later, my sister called again. I let it ring. She called twice more, then sent a text, "I know you saw the message. This isn't a joke. We really need the money. It's serious." Still no details, no apology, just pressure. Like she hadn't vanished when I was bleeding and shaking and too sore to even walk to the bathroom. I didn't reply. Then my mom called. I picked up. I think part of me still wanted some kind of closure, maybe even a sliver of guilt from her. She started in like nothing had happened, asked if I was doing okay, if the baby was sleeping better, and then, without missing a beat, said she and my dad had invested in something that backfired unexpectedly. They needed $1,500. She said it like she was talking about picking up dry cleaning. I asked her if she remembered the text I sent after my surgery. There was a pause, then a casual, "Well, we thought you'd manage. You're always so strong." That sentence hit harder than I expected, not because it was flattering, because it was lazy. "You're always so strong" is what people say when they don't want to help. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said I couldn't help them. She didn't try to argue. She just said fine, then hung up. That night, I looked through old photos of us, birthdays, holidays, beach trips. There I was in every single one, holding the cake, driving the car, paying the tab, always giving, always smiling. And suddenly I couldn't remember the last time they did something for me that didn't have a string attached. I took a breath, looked at my sleeping son, and thought, it stops with me. No more fixing, no more chasing. They thought they were asking for ton 500. After that call with my mom, things started to shift in small, irreversible ways. I didn't send out the usual group text with baby pictures that week. I didn't update anyone on my recovery or ask how things were going, and no one asked. Not one message. The silence was so loud it made me wonder if they'd ever actually cared, or if I had just been convenient a fixer, an extra hand, a spare wallet. Ryan came by on Tuesday to drop off a bag of groceries he said he accidentally overbought. I knew that was a lie, but it was the kind I could accept. I thanked him and offered him coffee. He hesitated at first, then nodded and sat at the kitchen table while I held my son in one arm and made coffee with the other. He told me about how his wife left without a fight. She just packed up one afternoon and said she couldn't do quiet suburbia anymore. He said it like he was still processing it months later. We didn't talk about anything heavy after that, just coffee, my son. It was the most comfortable I'd felt with another adult in weeks. Meanwhile, my family kept pushing in strange, half-hearted ways. My sister posted a cryptic story on Instagram. Some people forget where they came from. No name, no tags, but I knew who it was for. A few hours later, she texted again. "It's actually about Dad, not you. Don't be dramatic." I didn't reply. The next day, my cousin Danny called. We weren't super close, but she always had a way of being real, no sugarcoating. She'd heard from her mom that things were tense in the family. She asked if I was okay. I told her the truth, the whole thing from the day of my C-section to the last phone call with my mom. She listened quietly, then said, "Juliet, you've been the only one holding that family together for years. Maybe it's time you let it fall apart." That sentence stuck with me for days. I stopped answering my sister completely. I didn't tell them when I started physical therapy. I didn't tell them when my son smiled for the first time. I didn't even tell them when I found a small freelance gig that helped with the bills. Nothing. And they didn't notice, but what they did notice was the money. Another text came in. "Hey, we're a little behind this month. Any chance you can cover the insurance thing like last year?" That was from my dad. He never reached out unless it was about a bill. Not even when I was pregnant. Not even when he found out I was alone during delivery. I replied simply, "I can't. No excuses, no explanations." 5 minutes later, my mom texted, "Is everything okay with you financially?" Not "how are you?" Not "how's the baby?" Just concerned that their money tree might be drying up. I didn't reply. The next week, Ryan invited me and the baby to a small barbecue he was having with a few coworkers. I almost said no. Then I looked at my phone, saw the unread messages, and said yes. It was a simple afternoon, nothing special. But at one point, Ryan was holding my son and talking to one of his friends, and I caught myself smiling. Like genuinely smiling. Not the kind you force for pictures. The kind that happens before you even know it's there. And I realized something. My family hadn't just forgotten about me. They'd never really seen me at all. The barbecue turned out to be more of a turning point than I thought. One of Ryan's friends was a pediatric nurse, and when I mentioned my son's irregular sleeping patterns, she offered to take a quick look. It turned out he had a mild tongue tie, something none of the hospital nurses had noticed. She even helped me book a specialist appointment through her clinic. That night, as I tucked him in, I couldn't stop thinking a stranger had done more for me in 5 minutes than my own family in months. 2 days later, I got an email I wasn't expecting. It was from an attorney, a vague formal message letting me know my name had come up in a probate discussion. I blinked at the screen, reread it twice, and finally called the number. Apparently, my grandfather, my dad's estranged father, had passed away a year ago. Nobody told me. But in his will, he'd left behind a small property in upstate New York. A rundown cabin, nothing fancy. But the kicker, he'd left it to me. Not my dad, not my sister, just me. I hadn't even seen the man since I was a teenager. He and my dad had fought decades ago, and my family made him sound like some villain. But the lawyer said my name was handwritten into the will. He even left a note to the only one who ever asked how I was doing. That floored me. I remembered sending him a Christmas card when I was 16. I'd almost forgotten about it. Apparently he hadn't. So I called my dad. I didn't ask how he was. I just said, "Why didn't you tell me Grandpa died?" There was silence. Then he exhaled hard and said, "We didn't think it mattered." Didn't matter. A man I had reached out to once in a tiny act of kindness thought I mattered enough to leave me his only remaining asset. And my father didn't even tell me he had died. I hung up. That was the day something inside me cracked completely. I called the attorney back and started the process to claim the cabin. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't telling my family a thing about it. Meanwhile, the text picked up again. Not about Grandpa. They had no idea. My sister said her car needed repairs and hinted at needing a little help. My mom sent a picture of a hospital wristband with no caption. An hour later, she followed it with, "It's not serious, just insurance stuff, but we could use a buffer if possible." They were fishing, prodding. That same day, Ryan helped me install new blackout curtains in the nursery. My son had been sleeping better since the tongue tie fix. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had room to breathe. Later that night, as we were talking on the porch, I told him about the cabin, about the will, about everything. I thought he'd be surprised. He wasn't. He said, "That's what happens when you treat people right. Eventually it comes back." Then he told me something I wasn't expecting. His wife had filed for divorce that week. No drama, just paperwork. Final step in what had already been over for a long time. He smiled at me, and for the first time I didn't look away. The next morning, I woke up to a long message from my sister. "I know you've been distant, but I also know you're not heartless. We're not okay right now. I need you. We need you. Please help. Don't ignore this." Attached was a screenshot of a Venmo request, $200. No explanation. I sat there staring at it, holding my son in one arm and scrolling through the photos on my phone with the other birthday pictures, first bath, his tiny fingers gripping mine. Not one of those moments included them. They'd missed it all, and now they were asking for help. I didn't reply. I just hit decline. The Venmo request wasn't the last one. It was just the beginning of the unraveling. A few days after I declined it, my mom called again. Twice in a row, I let it ring. Then she left a voicemail, which I didn't listen to until later that night out of morbid curiosity. It started with her usual fake concern. "Just calling to check on you and the baby," then turned sharp. She said she'd heard I was coming into some property and that maybe we should all sit down and talk about things like adults. That's when I realized they knew. I don't know if the lawyer mentioned something to someone, or if my dad snooped, or if someone at the courthouse talked too much, but they found out about the cabin. The tone of everything shifted after that. My sister sent a paragraph-long message about how families should share blessings, and how Grandpa clearly meant it for all of us. She even tried to bring up how she had dreams of opening a boutique upstate, and that the cabin could make that happen. She'd never worked a day in retail in her life. Then my mom called again this time, trying a different angle. She said they were struggling, that the market was bad, that my dad's bad investments had drained their savings. She said they were trapped, and that surely I didn't want to see them lose the house. I stared at the phone while feeding my son. No emotion, just exhaustion. They weren't trying to rebuild a relationship, they were scrambling for a safety net. And I wasn't it anymore. That night, I talked to Ryan again. We sat out on his back steps drinking tea, both of us too tired for small talk. I told him everything, every ugly detail, the guilt, the pressure, the weird sense of freedom that was beginning to grow the more I said no. He didn't interrupt, just listened. Then he asked, "You ever think about selling the cabin?" I said no, not yet. He nodded slowly, then said, "You know, if you fixed it up just a little, you could probably rent it out. It's quiet up there. Could be your backup plan." The idea lit something in me I didn't expect. The next morning, I made the drive up to the cabin. Just me and my son. It was about 4 hours out. I hadn't been there since I was maybe 12. When I pulled up, the roof looked worse than in the pictures. The porch was sunken, the windows fogged with years of grime, but the bones were solid. It didn't feel haunted. It felt forgotten. And I could work with forgotten. I sent photos to Ryan. He said he'd come up next weekend to help. He already had tools in a truck. Just like that, we had a plan. The next blow came later that week. My dad showed up at my door unannounced. Just rang the bell and waited. I didn't answer at first. I stood behind the curtain, holding my baby heart pounding. He rang twice more, then just stood there. Finally, I opened the door halfway. He didn't say hi, didn't ask to hold his grandson, just said, "We need to talk about the property." I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and said, "There's nothing to talk about." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the person standing in front of him. "You're really doing this?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't try again. Just walked off, got in his car, and left. No drama, no yelling, just silence. It was the most honest interaction we'd had in years. By the time Ryan and I made it up to the cabin together, something between us had shifted. It wasn't just about help anymore. There were long looks, quiet smiles, moments when neither of us said anything, and somehow it still felt like a conversation. He was still married technically, but the papers were filed. He showed me the email. He wasn't rushing. Neither was I. But we both knew we just weren't alone anymore. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. The cabin wasn't anything fancy, but after 2 weekends of work, it started feeling like something real. Ryan patched the roof while I painted the inside walls a soft, warm white. My son started sleeping better there than he ever had at home. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew it felt right. The first kiss came after we put in the new screen door. We didn't plan it. It just happened standing in the kitchen, with his hands still dusty and a cup of coffee between us. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet moment we both stepped into without saying a word. He was still technically married then, but the papers were in. He showed me the confirmation the following week. No celebration, no drama, just an end to something that had already been over. Around the same time, the messages from my family turned frantic. My sister tried again, long texts about missing me and starting over and how family needs to stick together. Then came the twist. Mom said, "You have savings now. Can you help with just one thing? We're drowning." I didn't answer. Then the bank called. Someone had tried to access one of the old joint accounts I'd forgotten I was even on. One I opened years ago to help them temporarily. I shut it down. That was the final straw. Not a fight, just a quiet door closing. After that, I stopped responding completely. No explanations, no arguments, just silence. I didn't stop helping people. I just started helping the ones who showed up. Like Danny, who drove up one weekend with snacks, wine, and baby clothes. She didn't want anything, just time with us. Ryan started staying over more. We took turns feeding the baby, fixing the porch, picking paint samples. One night we were sitting outside and he said, "You know, we made this." He meant the cabin, but I think he meant more than that. I didn't need fireworks. I just needed this quiet, honest care. And by the time winter rolled in, my phone had stopped buzzing. They moved on. Or at least they stopped pretending. Me, I stayed right where I was, building something better from what they left behind. I didn't forgive them. Not in the traditional sense. I just stopped needing them. The ache that used to come when I thought about family dinners or childhood memories started to fade. It wasn't bitterness anymore, it was distance. And distance, I learned, can be peace. Ryan and I took a trip to the cabin again in early spring. The snow had melted and wildflowers had started to creep through the cracks in the front steps. My son had just started babbling more, trying to say mama. Ryan smiled every time he heard it. He'd pick him up and whisper, "You've got a strong mama." Every time he said it, it hit differently. Not like my mom's lazy, "You're always so strong." No. When Ryan said it, it sounded like admiration, not expectation. That day I realized I'd spent most of my life mistaking obligation for love. When people constantly take from you, you start believing that giving is your purpose, that your worth is tied to how much you can offer. But it's not. Sometimes walking away is the only way to be seen. A few months later, I got another email from the attorney. The cabin's deed was officially in my name. The process was complete. It was mine now. Mine. It still didn't feel real until I held the physical deed in my hands. Ryan was there. He smiled and said, "So what's next?" I looked around the small living room, the one we'd painted together, the crib in the corner, the smell of coffee still in the air, and said this, just this. I wasn't thinking about the money or revenge or even closure. I was thinking about peace, about a life where love wasn't a transaction. That night I stood on the porch holding my son, the sky turning violet over the trees. The air smelled clean, untouched. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. And I realized something I wish I'd known sooner. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to. It's who shows up when everyone else disappears. Months passed quietly. Life began to take on a rhythm that felt natural, peaceful even. My mornings started with coffee and the sound of birds outside the cabin windows. Ryan would come by after his night shifts, sometimes bringing fresh bagels or flowers he swore were on sale, and I'd just smile and let him in. My son started crawling by the fireplace, his laughter echoing through the cabin like music. Every milestone felt like a small miracle. Each day was proof that peace wasn't just possible, it was real. I'd stopped expecting calls or messages from my family. The silence no longer hurt, it just existed, like the static hum of an old radio station you finally tune out. Then one morning, I got a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real letter. The handwriting was familiar, my mother's. For a moment, I just stared at it, unsure if I even wanted to open it. Curiosity won. It started off polite, almost warm. She said she missed me, missed the baby, wanted to start over. Then midway through, the tone shifted. She mentioned the cabin said she'd heard I'd done some renovations, and that it would be nice if the family could visit sometime. Visit. That one word said everything. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't reaching out. She was circling back, trying to find another way in. I folded the letter neatly, slipped it back into the envelope, and set it on the counter. Then I walked outside and lit the fire pit. The letter burned in seconds, orange flames, curling around each word until they vanished. And I felt lighter. That night, Ryan asked if I was okay. I told him the truth. I said I finally realized they don't need to apologize for me to move on. He smiled and said, "That's how you know you're free." We sat under the stars in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that feels like understanding, not emptiness. Weeks later, Ryan officially moved into the cabin. Not with boxes and drama, just one duffel bag, a coffee mug, and a toothbrush he left by the sink. It wasn't a grand announcement. It was a quiet merging of two lives that had already intertwined. We built small traditions, Saturday pancakes, evening walks, bedtime stories, whispered under warm light. Sometimes I'd wake up before dawn, hear both of them breathing softly beside me, and think, this is it. This is home. One night, after putting my son to bed, Ryan turned to me and said, "You know, for someone who was told to try your neighbor, I think that turned out pretty well." We both laughed. That phrase, the one that had once broken my heart, no longer hurt. It had brought me here, to him, to peace. Months later, my sister tried one last time. An email this time, full of guilt and nostalgia. She said Mom wasn't doing well, that Dad had been distant, that she wished things were different. I read it, then closed it. No reply. Because sometimes silence is the only truth left to say. My son is 2 now. He knows how to say mama clearly, and when Ryan walks through the door, he yells Dada with pure joy. We still go to the cabin every few weeks. It's our escape, our reminder of how far we've come. I planted sunflowers out front last spring. They bloomed taller than I expected, golden and strong, just like the life I built from the ashes of what came before. If you'd told me a few years ago that being abandoned by my family would lead to something better, I wouldn't have believed you, but now I know. Sometimes losing everything you thought you needed is the only way to find what truly matters. And as I watch my son sleep, his tiny fingers curled around mine, I whisper to him the promise I once made to myself. It stops with me. No more chasing love, no more begging for care, no more fixing people who never wanted to be fixed. Just peace, just us, just life finally ours.